Have you ever looked at someone and sensed that they are carrying something invisible? Something heavy, ancient, and unspoken. They may smile politely. They may function well. They may even appear strong. But behind their eyes there is a depth that feels older than their years. What you are seeing is not simply sadness. It is not just stress. It is the psychological imprint of having gone through too much. There is a particular transformation that happens when a human being endures repeated emotional, relational, or existential overwhelm. It is not the dramatic breakdown we often expect. In fact, it is usually quiet, subtle, gradual. The nervous system adapts, the personality reorganizes. The person learns to survive in ways that are brilliant, costly, and often invisible even to themselves. In clinical psychology, we understand this through the lens of chronic stress, exposure, and complex trauma. When distress is not a single event but a pattern, when unpredictability, neglect, betrayal, loss, or responsibility beyond one's developmental capacity becomes normal, the brain does not simply move on. It recalibrates. The amygdala, responsible for detecting threat, becomes more sensitive. The prefrontal cortex, which helps regulate emotion and make measured decisions, may become overtaxed. The body's stress response system, particularly the hypothalamic, pituitary, adrenal axis, can remain partially activated long after the original danger has passed. But here is the paradox: many people who have gone through too much do not look traumatized. They look capable. They are often the dependable ones. The mature child, the emotionally intelligent friend, the partner who anticipates everyone's needs. They learned early that attunement was survival. If they could read the room, they could stay safe. If they could manage other people's emotions, they could prevent chaos. If they could suppress their own needs, they could reduce the risk of rejection or conflict. Over time, this adaptive intelligence becomes identity. Psychologically, this is known as overcompensation fused with hypervigilance. The individual becomes exquisitely sensitive to micro-expressions, tone shifts, and subtle relational cues. This is not merely empathy, it is a survival skill encoded into the nervous system. Their brain has been trained to scan for danger before danger fully emerges. And because this scanning happens automatically, they may not even realize they are doing it. The cost of this constant vigilance is exhaustion. Imagine living in a house where the fire alarm occasionally goes off for no reason. Even if there is no fire, your body still surges with adrenaline. Now imagine that alarm activating dozens of times a day, triggered not by smoke but by facial expressions, delayed text messages, or changes in someone's mood. Over time, the body grows tired. Yet it does not fully power down. This is why many people who have gone through too much describe a peculiar combination of numbness and tension. They feel detached, but also on edge. They struggle to relax deeply. Sleep may be light or interrupted. Joy can feel muted, as if experienced through a pane of glass. Clinically, we call this dysregulation, a nervous system oscillating between hyperarousal and hypoarousal. There is another layer that is less discussed: identity diffusion through chronic adaptation. When a child or adult must constantly adjust to survive, they often lose contact with their spontaneous self. Preferences become flexible. Boundaries become permeable. The question, "What do I want?" feels surprisingly difficult to answer. Instead, they become experts in what is needed right now. Over years, this external orientation can erode a stable sense of self. From a developmental standpoint, identity forms through safe exploration. A child expresses anger and learns it does not destroy love. They assert independence and discover they are still accepted. They fail and are reassured of their worth. But when the environment is unstable or emotionally unsafe, exploration becomes risky. Authentic expression may lead to punishment, withdrawal, or chaos. So the psyche makes a calculation: survival first, authenticity later. The tragedy is that later sometimes never arrives. Another defining feature of those who have endured too much is emotional compression. They feel deeply, but selectively. Certain emotions, grief, fear, longing, may be walled off because at one point they were overwhelming. Suppression, however, is not deletion. Research consistently shows that inhibited emotion does not disappear, it relocates. It may manifest as chronic muscle tension, gastrointestinal issues, migraines, or sudden irritability that seems disproportionate to the moment. Yet alongside this compression, there is often extraordinary resilience. Neuroplasticity ensures that repeated coping builds strength. Many individuals develop remarkable problem-solving skills, independence, and endurance. They can tolerate ambiguity. They can function under pressure. They often become leaders in crisis because chaos feels familiar. In fact, calm environments may feel strangely unsettling because there is no immediate problem to solve. This leads to a subtle psychological conflict. Peace can feel unsafe. When the nervous system has been conditioned to equate alertness with survival, stillness may trigger anxiety rather than relief. The absence of threat can feel like the calm before a storm. So the person may unconsciously recreate familiar dynamics, choosing unpredictable partners, overloading themselves with responsibility, or procrastinating until pressure mounts, just to re-enter a state that feels known. Familiar does not mean healthy. It means recognized. There is also a relational consequence. People who have gone through too much often struggle to receive care. Giving feels natural. Receiving feels exposing. To accept help requires vulnerability, and vulnerability once carried risk. Compliments may be deflected. Support may be minimized. They may insist, "I'm fine," even when they are not, because self-reliance became synonymous with safety. Underneath this self-reliance is often a profound fear. If I fall apart, no one will catch me. Attachment theory provides insight here. When early relationships are inconsistent or overwhelming, individuals may develop anxious, avoidant, or disorganized attachment styles. These patterns are not character flaws, they are adaptive strategies. The anxious individual monitors closeness intensely. The avoidant individual downregulates emotional needs. The disorganized individual oscillates between seeking and fearing intimacy. All are attempts to manage relational pain. What makes the psychology of too much particularly complex is that suffering is cumulative. The nervous system keeps score. Even experiences that seemed manageable at the time can layer upon one another, narrowing the window of tolerance, the zone in which a person can function calmly and think clearly. Once that window narrows, smaller stressors can evoke disproportionate reactions. And yet, many of these individuals pride themselves on being strong. Strength, in this context, often means endurance without complaint. It means pushing through. It means minimizing one's own wounds because others had it worse. But unprocessed pain does not dissolve through comparison. It waits. It lingers. It shapes perception, expectation, and behavior in ways that are subtle but powerful. The most misunderstood aspect of people who have gone through too much is this: their guardedness is not coldness, their independence is not arrogance, and their intensity is not instability. These are adaptive architectures built under pressure. The psyche did exactly what it was designed to do: protect the organism at all costs. The question is not why they became this way. The real question is how these protective architectures continue operating long after the original danger has faded, and why they are so resistant to change. To understand this, we have to examine conditioning. The human nervous system learns through association and repetition. When a particular behavior reduces pain or prevents chaos, the brain encodes it as valuable. This is reinforced through a process known as negative reinforcement. The removal of a threat strengthens the behavior that preceded it. If staying silent prevented conflict, silence becomes safety. If anticipating a parent's mood prevented emotional explosion, hyper-awareness becomes intelligence. The brain does not ask whether the strategy is healthy. It asks whether it works. Over time, these strategies move from conscious choice to automatic pattern. Consider a clinical example. A woman in her 30s, highly accomplished and respected in her field, seeks therapy for chronic relational dissatisfaction. She describes partners as emotionally unavailable and prides herself on not being needy. As we explore her history, it becomes clear that emotional self-sufficiency was once essential. Growing up with a depressed caregiver, she learned that expressing her own distress increased the household burden. So she became the stable one, the composed one, the low-maintenance one. In adulthood, however, that same composure prevents intimacy. When partners attempt to move closer emotionally, she feels irritation rather than comfort. Her nervous system interprets dependence, hers or theirs, as dangerous. She does not consciously believe this, yet her body reacts with subtle withdrawal. The architecture persists because it was once life-saving. Research on attachment and stress physiology supports this pattern. Studies measuring cortisol levels show that individuals with histories of chronic relational stress often exhibit atypical stress responses in close interactions. Some display exaggerated spikes during minor disagreements. Others show blunted responses, a kind of emotional flattening. Both are regulatory adaptations. Both interfere with secure connection. There is also the phenomenon of predictive processing. The brain is not merely reactive, it is anticipatory. It builds internal models of how relationships and environments function. If early experiences taught someone that closeness leads to pain, the brain predicts pain in moments of vulnerability. These predictions influence perception. Neutral facial expressions may be interpreted as disapproval. Delayed responses may be read as rejection. The individual is not irrational. They are perceiving through a model shaped by repetition. A well-known psychological experiment illustrates this principle. In studies of learned helplessness, subjects exposed to uncontrollable stressors eventually stop attempting escape, even when escape becomes possible. Their nervous system internalizes the expectation of futility. In humans, repeated experiences of powerlessness can produce a quieter version of this effect. The person may stop advocating for their needs, not because they lack them, but because past attempts were ineffective or punished. Yet there is another, less obvious adaptation: over-control. Some individuals respond to excessive unpredictability by becoming highly structured. They plan meticulously. They set rigid goals. They dislike ambiguity. This is not mere perfectionism. It is an attempt to create external stability when internal stability feels fragile. Control becomes a proxy for safety. The more chaotic the past, the tighter the present grip. Ironically, this often generates new stress. Relationships require flexibility. Life requires uncertainty tolerance. When control strategies collide with reality, anxiety rises. The person may blame themselves for not trying hard enough, reinforcing the very vigilance that exhausts them. We must also examine the role of memory. Traumatic or overwhelming experiences are often encoded differently from ordinary events. Instead of being integrated as coherent narratives, they may remain fragmented, sensory, emotional, and easily reactivated. A tone of voice, a scent, a particular season can trigger physiological responses without conscious recollection of why. This implicit memory keeps the past alive in the present. Neuroscientific research using functional imaging demonstrates that when individuals recall unresolved distress, areas associated with threat detection activate more strongly than areas responsible for temporal orientation. In simple terms, the brain responds as though the danger is happening now. This is why logic alone rarely dissolves these patterns. Insight is helpful, but regulation is biological. There is also a social dimension. People who have endured significant adversity often receive praise for their resilience. They are told they are strong, mature, wise beyond their years. While validating, this praise can create pressure. If strength becomes identity, vulnerability feels like betrayal of that identity. The individual may unconsciously maintain their guardedness to preserve how others see them and how they see themselves. Over years, the protective architecture fuses with personality. It no longer feels like a strategy. It feels like who I am. This fusion is why change can feel destabilizing. If hyper-independence softens, who replaces it? If vigilance relaxes, what ensures safety? If emotional suppression lifts, will the stored grief flood everything? The psyche prefers familiar discomfort over unfamiliar openness. Familiar discomfort at least has rules. And yet, beneath these defenses, there is often an unarticulated longing. The longing is not merely for relief from pain. It is for expansion, for spontaneity, for relationships where one does not have to perform competence or emotional restraint. The tragedy is that the very systems designed to protect this longing now obstruct it. So we arrive at the central paradoxi. The architecture that once ensured survival now restricts vitality. Understanding this intellectually is one step. Experiencing it viscerally is another. The nervous system must learn, not just think, that safety can exist without hypervigilance, that connection can occur without collapse, that vulnerability does not inevitably lead to annihilation. The question, then, is whether these deeply embedded patterns can truly be rewired. And if so, what precise process allows a person who has gone through too much to finally experience enough? Yes, these patterns can be rewired, but not through force, not through self-criticism, and not through pretending the past did not matter. The psychological secret is this: survival strategies dissolve only when the nervous system experiences consistent, embodied safety that is stronger than the memory of danger. Insight opens the door. Experience walks you through it. If someone has gone through too much, their healing cannot be purely cognitive. Telling yourself, "I'm safe now," does not convince a body trained to expect threat. The shift happens when safety is repeated, predictable, and felt physiologically. This is why transformation often occurs in relationships, therapeutic, romantic, communal, where new patterns are practiced, not just understood. Let's make this practical. The first action step is nervous system regulation before self-analysis. Many people attempt to think their way out of patterns that are fundamentally biological. Instead, begin with daily regulation rituals, slow breathing with elongated exhales, gentle, rhythmic movement such as walking, cold water on the face to stimulate the vagus nerve. Consistency matters more than intensity. These practices signal to the body that activation can rise and fall without catastrophe. Over time, the baseline shifts. The second step is titrated vulnerability. For someone who has survived by being guarded, vulnerability must be incremental, not dramatic confessions, not emotional flooding, small, controlled exposures. Express a mild preference instead of defaulting to accommodation. Share a minor insecurity with someone trustworthy. Ask for help in a contained way. Each successful experience updates the brain's predictive model. Closeness does not equal danger. In trauma research, this is called memory reconsolidation. When a new emotional experience contradicts an old expectation, the brain rewrites its coding. But the contradiction must be lived, not merely imagined. The third step is boundary differentiation. People who have endured too much often swing between overextension and withdrawal. Healthy boundaries are neither rigid walls nor open doors. They are selective permeability. Start by identifying where responsibility actually ends. If someone is upset, ask internally, is this mine to carry? If the answer is no, practice tolerating the discomfort of not fixing it. This retrains the nervous system to distinguish empathy from enmeshment. The fourth step is grief integration. Underneath hyper, independence and control is often unprocessed grief for lost childhoods, unmet needs, betrayals, versions of the self that never had space to emerge. Grief is not weakness, it is completion. When grief is metabolized, the energy bound in protection becomes available for creativity and connection. This may require therapy, journaling, or intentional reflection. The key is allowing emotion in doses that are intense enough to process, but not so overwhelming that they re-traumatize. The fifth step is identity reconstruction. If survival became identity, healing can feel like emptiness. So the question becomes, who are you beyond adaptation? Explore preferences without justification. Try activities with no productivity outcome. Notice what feels energizing rather than impressive. Identity rebuilds through experimentation, not declaration. There is also a relational component that cannot be bypassed. Seek environments where calm is normal, where communication is direct, where repair follows conflict. The nervous system entrains to the systems around it. If you remain surrounded by volatility, your vigilance will remain logical. Healing accelerates in regulated ecosystems. Now, a crucial truth: you do not eliminate your survival architecture. You refine it. The hyper-awareness becomes intuition without paranoia. The independence becomes self-trust without isolation. The resilience remains, but it is no longer fueled by fear. What once was armor becomes wisdom. And perhaps the most important shift is this: strength is redefined. Strength is no longer endurance without complaint. It is the capacity to remain open without collapsing. It is the ability to need and not feel ashamed. It is choosing rest without guilt. It is responding instead of reacting. When someone who has gone through too much begins to feel safe, something remarkable happens. Their humor deepens. Their creativity returns. Their body softens. They stop scanning every room for exits. They begin, slowly, to inhabit their own life rather than manage it. If you recognize yourself in this, understand that your patterns are not evidence of brokenness. They are evidence of adaptation. But adaptation is not destiny. If you want to master your mind and recondition your nervous system, surround yourself with conversations and communities that value psychological depth and deliberate growth. Healing accelerates when insight is reinforced collectively. Do not attempt transformation in isolation when connection is the very medicine. The past may have required you to be vigilant. The future may require you to be open. And the moment you realize that you no longer have to survive what is not happening, you begin, perhaps for the first time, to truly live.